The unexpected encounter. John had never believed in the impossible. He was a man of logic, a man of science. But everything changed when he found himself standing on an alien planet, a world unlike anything he had ever seen before. It had started like any normal day. John had been working late in his lab, tinkering with a new experiment, something that could change the future of space exploration. He had just finished running a test on a device that he believed could send signals across the stars when a sudden flash of light overwhelmed him. Before he could even react, the world around him spun wildly. The last thing he remembered was feeling a strange pull, as if the very fabric of reality itself was bending around him. When he opened his eyes again, John's heart raced. The landscape before him was unlike anything he had ever imagined. Towering, strange trees rose into the sky, their bark glowing with a soft blue light. In the distance, he saw massive, floating structures that resembled cities, but they were made of material he couldn't recognize. There was no sign of the Earth he knew. John stumbled backward, panic setting in. "Where am I?" he muttered to himself, his voice shaking. He spun around, searching for anything familiar. But there was nothing. No buildings, no roads, no signs of human life. Then he heard something, a noise, a sound that made his blood run cold. It was the unmistakable sound of footsteps. But they were heavy, echoing against the ground. John froze, trying to listen. The footsteps grew louder, and before he knew it, a figure appeared from behind a nearby tree. She was tall, much taller than any human woman he had ever seen. Her skin was a shade of violet that seemed to shimmer in the soft light of the alien planet. Long, silver hair cascaded down her back like a waterfall of stars. Her eyes, large and glowing, held an intensity that made John feel as if she could see straight through him. She was dressed in an outfit made of metallic material that looked both elegant and otherworldly. John took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. Who are you?" he asked, his voice trembling. The woman didn't answer at first. Instead, she studied him carefully, as if trying to understand something about him. Then, after a long silence, she spoke in a voice that was smooth, but also strangely cold. "I am Zaria," she said simply. John blinked. "Zaria, where am I? What is this place?" Zaria's eyes softened slightly, and she tilted her head as if she were considering his question. "You are on my world now," she said. "You are far from home. But you were meant to be here." "Meant to be here," John repeated, confused. "I don't even know how I got here. One moment I was in my lab, and now I'm on this planet. How did I get here?" Zaria's gaze hardened slightly. She took a step closer, her movements fluid and graceful. "There are forces at work that even I don't fully understand. But you must trust me, John. You were brought here for a reason." John's mind raced. There was no way this was real. He had to be dreaming. Or maybe he was hallucinating. But the vivid colors of the landscape, the strange buzzing in the air, and the unearthly beauty of Zaria's features told him one thing. This was no dream. "I don't understand," he said slowly, his voice laced with disbelief. "Why me? I'm just a scientist. I don't belong here. You are more than you realize, John," Zaria interrupted. Her voice was firm, but there was something in her eyes that made John feel like she knew something he didn't. Something important. "You may not understand it now, but you have a purpose here. And that purpose has to do with me." John stared at her, trying to make sense of her words. "What do you mean, your purpose?" "I'm not." Zaria stepped forward, cutting him off. "You are the one I've been waiting for," she said, her voice lowering. "You are the one I've chosen." John's heart skipped a beat. Chosen? Chosen for what? Zaria's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, a flicker of something unspoken passed between them. "You are to be my mate." John stared at her, stunned. His mind couldn't process what he had just heard. What are you talking about? I'm human. I'm not. I can't be your mate. Zaria took a step back, her expression softening. You are not just any human. Your blood, your heritage, is special. You have a connection to my people, one that has been forgotten by time. And now, it is time for you to fulfill your role. John shook his head. I don't understand. None of this makes sense. I just want to go home. Zaria's eyes flashed with something fierce. But she didn't speak. She just stood there, watching him. The air between them grew heavier, filled with a tension that John could feel in his bones. He had no idea what was happening, but he knew one thing for sure. Nothing would ever be the same again. As he turned away, ready to escape into the alien wilderness, a deep voice echoed behind him, freezing him in his tracks. You think you can run? John spun around and saw another figure approaching, this one even more imposing than Zaria. It was an older woman, much taller and dressed in elaborate robes that shimmered with the same strange glow as the trees around them. The woman's eyes were sharp, and her presence felt dangerous. Who are you? John demanded, his voice shaking. What do you want with me? The woman smiled, but it was cold, calculating. I am her mother. And you? She paused, her eyes narrowing. You are not what we expected. John's stomach twisted with dread as the woman's gaze seemed to pierce into his very soul. Zaria's truth. John couldn't move. The words the Queen spoke rang in his mind, louder than any noise he had ever heard. You are not what we expected. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, but it carried an edge of something ancient and unforgiving. Her gaze never left him, sharp and unblinking. John took a shaky step back, his heart racing. What do you mean? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm just a scientist. I'm not anything special. The Queen's lips curled into a thin, humorless smile. You are wrong, human. You are much more than you realize. John felt a wave of confusion wash over him. He wanted to understand, to grasp what was happening, but everything felt like it was slipping through his fingers, like sand in the wind. Zaria had told him he had a purpose, but he couldn't see it. He wasn't anything more than a man from Earth. He wasn't anyone important. Zaria stepped forward, her eyes fixed on her mother with a quiet defiance. It's true. He has a purpose, one that even we were unaware of until now. His bloodline, his very existence, is the key to something much larger. The Queen's expression darkened, her lips pressing into a thin line. We knew of the humans. We knew of your race's potential, but I never believed any of this. She paused, her eyes briefly flickering with something John couldn't quite understand. Until now. John swallowed hard, his confusion deepening. You're saying I'm important, because I'm human. Zaria stepped to his side, her voice soft but firm. Not just because you're human. It's your bloodline. Your ancestry connects us in a way you don't understand. John shook his head, trying to make sense of what she was saying. My bloodline? I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just a guy from Earth. The Queen's piercing eyes softened for a moment, and she sighed. It's not just Earth that you come from. Long ago, before your people ever set foot in the stars, there was a pact between our races, a bond, formed in secrecy between your ancestors and mine. John felt a chill run down his spine. A pact? What does that have to do with me? Zaria stepped closer to him, her hand gently resting on his arm. I know this is hard to believe, but the bond that was created long ago is carried through the bloodline of those who were chosen. And you, John, are one of the last of those who carry that bond. John stared at her, his mind racing. You're saying my family was somehow connected to your people? Zaria nodded. Not just your family. Your bloodline holds a power, a gift that was passed down from generation to generation. A gift that has now manifested in you. John's eyes widened as a sickening thought crossed his mind. What kind of gift? The Queen's lips curled into a cold smile. The gift of strength. The ability to understand the will of our people, to connect with the very core of our race's power. It is a gift that only a few can inherit. And you, John, are one of the chosen." John recoiled. "But I'm just a scientist. I don't have any special powers. I don't even know what you're talking about." Zaria's voice was soft, but filled with certainty. "It hasn't manifested yet, but it will. In time, you will understand. And with it, you will become more than you ever imagined." John's heart pounded. This was all too much. He had come to this strange world by accident, had met Zaria by chance, and now he was being told that his entire existence was tied to an ancient alien race. He felt like he was caught in a whirlwind, everything spinning around him, pulling him in directions he couldn't control. The Queen observed him for a moment, her eyes narrowing. "You have no idea what this means, do you? You're the last link between our people and yours. The bond that was created long ago is about to be tested, and your role in it is crucial." John felt dizzy. "Tested? What do you mean tested?" Zaria looked at her mother, then turned her gaze back to John, her expression filled with a quiet intensity. "The galaxy is on the brink of war. There are factions that want to destroy everything. Our people, your people, everything is in danger. And you are the key to stopping it." John felt his chest tighten. "War? But I'm just a man. What could I possibly do?" The Queen stepped forward, her tone now cold and commanding. "You are not just any man. You carry the blood of both your ancestors and mine. You have the ability to unite our worlds, to end the conflict that has been brewing for centuries." John was silent, trying to take in the weight of her words. Could this really be true? Could he really be the one to save not only Earth, but this alien world as well? Zaria reached for his hand, her touch gentle. "It won't be easy. You will have to face challenges, some you may not be ready for. But you are the one who can bridge the gap between our people." John stood frozen, his mind reeling. He had always thought his life was about science, about discovery, but now he was being told he had a destiny far greater than he could have ever imagined. He wasn't just a scientist, he was something more, and the weight of that was almost too much to bear. As Zaria's hand lingered on his, the Queen spoke again, her voice low and filled with an unspoken threat. "You have no choice, John. The universe will demand it of you, and if you refuse, the consequences will be far worse than you can imagine." John's eyes flickered to the Queen, then back to Zaria. He didn't know what to believe, but one thing was clear: his life would never be the same. Whatever this was, whatever destiny had brought him here, he was now tied to a world far beyond his understanding. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. I don't know what I'm supposed to do." Zaria squeezed his hand, her expression gentle yet resolute. "You will know, John. In time, you will know." As John stood there, lost in the unknown, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had been pulled into a much bigger story, one that would change not only his future but the fate of entire worlds. The alien Queen's disbelief. John barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, his mind raced with thoughts of the Queen's words, of Zaria's promise, of the mysterious bond that connected him to this alien world. He could feel the weight of the galaxy pressing down on his shoulders, and with each passing hour, the fear and confusion in his chest only grew. He had woken up early, unsure of what to expect next. The palace was quiet, too quiet. The walls, made of some gleaming, translucent material, shimmered faintly in the soft light of the alien sun. John couldn't help but feel small here, out of place. This wasn't a world meant for humans. It was a place of ancient power, of secrets that were beyond his comprehension. Zaria had told him to wait for her. She would return to explain more. But as he sat alone in the silence of the grand chamber, his mind drifted to the strange woman who had appeared the day before, the Queen. Her piercing eyes, her commanding presence, haunted him. Finally, the door to the chamber opened with a soft hiss. Zaria stepped in, her face a mask of calm, but her eyes were filled with something else, something that seemed to glow with the fire of determination. "You look troubled," she said softly, her voice comforting yet filled with an unspoken urgency. John didn't meet her gaze immediately. Instead, he stared down at his hands, as though they could offer him some kind of answers. "I don't understand what's happening. Everything you told me yesterday. It feels impossible. I'm just a man, Zaria. A man who doesn't belong here." Zaria moved closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You do belong here. You've always belonged here. You just didn't know it yet." Her words didn't help. They only made him more confused. The weight of his supposed destiny, the bloodline he didn't know existed, felt heavier now than ever before. Before he could speak again, the Queen entered. She didn't wait for permission, her entrance as grand as it was intimidating. Her gaze swept over John, sizing him up like a predator would its prey. John could feel the tension in the air the moment she stepped into the room. "The human is still here," the Queen said coldly, her voice carrying authority that echoed in the vast space. "I expected you to have more sense than this, Zaria. Why have you brought him here? He is nothing more than a liability." John straightened at the Queen's words, anger rising in his chest. He had enough of being treated like an outsider, like a thing to be discarded. "I'm not a liability," he said, his voice steady but firm. "And I'm not going anywhere. Zaria told me I have a role to play in all of this, and I'm not going to back down now." The Queen's sharp eyes flicked to him, a slight smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. "You speak boldly for a man who has no idea what he's involved in." Zaria stepped between them, her gaze defiant. "Mother, please. He is not just any human. He is the one we've been waiting for." The Queen's expression hardened. "Do you truly believe that, daughter? Do you really believe that this man, a mere human, is worthy of the role you've assigned him?" Her voice was cold, almost biting. "Humans have always been weak. They lack the power, the resilience, the wisdom that our people possess. What makes you think that one of them could save us?" John's heart pounded in his chest as the Queen's words hit him like a hammer. She was right. Humans were often seen as insignificant by the rest of the galaxy. Weak, fragile, but something inside him, something deep in his blood, in his very soul, told him that he was meant for more. He wasn't just an ordinary man. He had to be more. "I don't know what you're expecting, but I know what I can do," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I might be human, but I have something inside me. I've always known that I wasn't meant for a normal life. There's a reason I'm here, and I'm going to find out what that is." The Queen's expression softened, her eyes narrowing as she studied him closely. "You have no idea what you're asking for," she murmured. "You think you can just waltz in and fix everything. This is not some small task, human. If you fail, it will not only cost you your life, it will cost the lives of countless others." Zaria turned to face her mother, her voice rising in frustration. "We don't have time for doubt, Mother. You've seen the signs. You've felt the unrest among the factions. The war is coming. We need him." The Queen's gaze flickered toward the large windows, where the skies above the alien city were streaked with the glowing lights of distant battleships. The galaxy was at war. Her face was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of fear. It was small, but it was there. "I see the signs," the Queen admitted, her voice low. "I have seen the factions rise against us. I've seen the battles on the horizon. But you, Zaria, you've placed all your hopes on this human. You've tied your fate, and the fate of our people, to him." John met the Queen's gaze, unflinching. "I don't know how I can help yet, but I'm not afraid of this. I won't turn my back now." For a long moment, the Queen didn't speak. The silence between them stretched on, thick with unspoken words. Finally, the Queen turned her gaze to Zaria, her expression unreadable. "Very well," she said. "You have chosen him, but you will regret this, daughter. Mark my words. If he fails, there will be no second chance." Zaria stood her ground. I believe in him. And I believe in our people's future. John didn't know what the future held, but for the first time since arriving on this alien world, he felt something inside him stir, a sense of purpose, of destiny. He wasn't just some human lost in a strange world. He was part of something much bigger. And whether the Queen believed it or not, he was ready to face whatever came next. The Queen didn't say another word. She turned and left the room, her footsteps echoing like the distant rumble of thunder. John and Zaria were left in silence. Zaria took a deep breath, turning to face him with a look of quiet determination. The war is coming, John. We don't have time. We need to move fast. Are you ready? John nodded, his resolve strengthening with each passing moment. I'm ready. I don't know what's coming, but I'm ready to face it. And with that, the two of them stepped into the unknown, where everything they knew would soon be tested, and their world, both alien and human, would change forever. A dangerous secret. The morning light streamed through the translucent walls of the palace, casting long shadows across the stone floor. John stood near a large window, looking out at the strange city below. It was breathtaking. The alien architecture, the massive floating structures, the colors that seemed to shimmer with energy. But his mind wasn't on the beauty of the place. His mind was racing with thoughts of the Queen, her words, and the mysterious bond that seemed to tie him to this world. Zaria had left him for a few hours, promising she would return. She had told him that they needed to prepare for what was coming, but she hadn't said what exactly they were preparing for. He was still reeling from the conversation with the Queen. The Queen had made it clear that she didn't believe in John's ability to save anyone, let alone help her people. And yet Zaria was still by his side. She believed in him, and that belief was something he didn't take lightly. As he stood there, lost in thought, he felt a presence behind him. Zaria, are you all right? She asked softly, her voice almost hesitant. John turned to face her, forcing a smile. I'm fine. Just thinking about everything. Zaria stepped closer, her eyes filled with concern. I know it's a lot to take in, but we don't have much time. You need to understand something important, something I couldn't tell you before. John raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Zaria glanced around, as if making sure no one was listening. There's more to your bloodline than you realize. I've told you that you have a connection to our people, but there's a reason it's so important. A dangerous reason. John felt a chill run down his spine. A dangerous reason. She nodded, her expression grave. It's not just about a bond between our people. It's about something much older. Something that has been hidden for centuries. John felt a knot tighten in his stomach. What are you saying? What's hidden? Zaria took a deep breath before speaking. Your ancestors didn't just form a pact with our people. They were part of something far more powerful. The truth is, your bloodline carries a key that unlocks something very dangerous. John's head spun. A key? What do you mean? What is it unlocking? Zaria lowered her voice, as if afraid to say the words out loud. It unlocks a power, an ancient force, a force that has been dormant for centuries, but it's starting to wake up now. And if it's unleashed, it could destroy everything. John felt as though the ground beneath him had just shifted. Destroy everything. What kind of power are we talking about? Zaria's gaze darkened, her eyes flickering with a mix of fear and resolve. The kind of power that could tear entire worlds apart. The kind of power that our enemies have been searching for, and now they know it's within your reach. John took a step back, trying to process what she was saying. So, you're telling me that my ancestors were part of something that could destroy the galaxy? Zaria nodded slowly. Yes, and it's not just a weapon. It's a force of nature, something that can control the very fabric of reality itself. It can change the course of history, and if it falls into the wrong hands, it could be used to dominate or annihilate entire civilizations. John felt his head swim. He had never imagined something like this. He was a scientist, not a hero. He wasn't supposed to be the one carrying this kind of weight, but somehow, the truth was undeniable. He was connected to this power, and now it seemed that the whole galaxy was watching him. "You're saying my blood holds this power?" John asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zaria's eyes locked onto his, her gaze unyielding. "Yes, and it's starting to awaken inside you." The Queen knew it. That's why she was so reluctant to trust you. The moment she realized what you were, she feared what might happen if you couldn't control it. John felt a strange warmth in his chest, as though something was stirring deep within him. It was almost as if his very body was reacting to the idea of this power. He could feel a hum, a vibration just beneath the surface of his skin, and it scared him. How do I control it? How do I stop it from destroying everything? Zaria stepped closer, placing her hand on his arm. "That's what we have to figure out. Together." Just as she spoke, there was a sudden burst of energy outside the palace. The air trembled with a low, ominous hum, and the sky darkened as ships appeared on the horizon, hovering ominously over the alien city. The ground shook as the ships fired their weapons, sending shockwaves through the air. Zaria's expression hardened, her eyes flashing with a mix of fear and determination. "They're here, the factions we've been watching. They know what's at stake now. They've come to claim you, John. And if we don't act fast, they'll take you by force." John's heart raced as he turned to look out at the chaos unfolding. Ships were descending, their engines glowing with an eerie, otherworldly light. The people below were running in panic, trying to take cover from the incoming attack. The situation had escalated far beyond anything he could have imagined. This wasn't just about a bond between two races anymore. It was about survival. "Zaria, what do we do?" John asked, his voice tight with fear. She looked back at him, her face resolute. "We fight. We protect what's ours. We protect you." John's mind was racing. He had never been a soldier. He had never been in a real fight. But now, it seemed like his world had been turned upside down. He was no longer just a scientist. He was a key to something far greater, something dangerous, and the galaxy was on the brink of war because of it. Zaria gripped his hand tightly, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We have to get to the council chamber. The Queen will need us there. If we don't act now, we'll lose everything." John nodded, his fear slowly turning into something else, something like resolve. The truth had been laid bare before him. He couldn't deny it anymore. He wasn't just a man caught in a strange world. He was the key to a power that could change everything. And it was time for him to take control of it, no matter the cost. Escape to the unknown. The air was thick with tension as the alien ships descended from the darkened sky. Their metallic forms gleamed under the glow of the city's towering lights, casting long shadows over the streets below. The sound of their engines, a deep, resonating hum, echoed through the palace halls, vibrating the stone beneath John's feet. He could feel the weight of their presence even before they arrived. It was as though the entire world held its breath, waiting for the first move to be made. John had never imagined anything like this, never imagined that he would be standing on an alien planet, caught between a war he didn't understand and a power inside him that he couldn't control. But now, there was no turning back. The factions had arrived, and they were after him. His bloodline, the key to an ancient power, was the reason they had come, and John knew that the only way to survive was to move fast and keep moving. "We have to go," Zaria said urgently, her eyes scanning the sky. She was calm, but her voice betrayed her worry. "They'll be here any minute. We don't have time to waste." John didn't need to be told twice. His heart raced as he followed Zaria through the palace, his mind still reeling from everything that had happened. The truth about his bloodline, the power that was awakening inside him, it was all too much. But in the face of the alien ships above, he knew there was no time for questions. There was only one thing left to do: survive. Zaria led him down a winding corridor, her footsteps quick and silent. The palace, once a place of strange beauty, now felt like a prison. Every turn they made seemed to lead deeper into the heart of the building, away from the central chambers and the queen. They were going underground, toward a hidden escape route that Zaria had mentioned earlier. It was the only way out, the only chance they had to get away without being caught. As they reached a metal door, Zaria paused, her hand resting on the handle. She turned to John, her expression serious. "Once we leave, there's no going back. The factions will be looking for us, and I can't promise you that we'll be safe." John nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. He had no illusions about the danger they were in. But he wasn't afraid. Not anymore. He had been dragged into this world of unknowns and ancient powers, but he wasn't about to run from it. If he was going to survive, he would fight. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady. Zaria opened the door, revealing a dark, narrow tunnel that stretched deep beneath the palace. The walls were smooth and cold, and the air inside felt stale, as though it had not been disturbed in years. As they descended, John could feel the urgency building in his chest. He didn't know where this tunnel would lead, but he had to trust Zaria. She had been by his side from the moment he had arrived on this strange world, and if there was anyone he could rely on, it was her. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the silence. John's mind was still racing, but it was hard to focus on anything other than the task at hand. He had to keep his head straight. He had to think about what came next, because running away was only the beginning. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the unknown. The further they went, the darker it became, until they could barely see each other in the dim light. Zaria didn't slow down, though. She moved with purpose, her eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, as if expecting someone, or something, to appear. Finally, after what felt like hours of running, they reached the end of the tunnel. The walls here were lined with strange symbols, ancient markings that seemed to pulse with energy. Zaria stopped in front of a large stone door, its surface covered in intricate carvings that John couldn't understand. It looked ancient, as though it had been waiting for centuries. "This is it," Zaria said, her voice low. "This is the way out. It leads to a hidden spaceport. From there, we can escape." John's eyes flicked from the door to Zaria. He could feel the weight of her words. If they were going to leave this planet, they had to go through the spaceport. It was their only shot. The factions wouldn't stop hunting them. And the longer they stayed in one place, the more dangerous it would become. But before Zaria could do anything, the sound of distant explosions echoed through the tunnel. The ground shook beneath their feet, and the walls seemed to tremble with the force of the blast. John's heart skipped a beat. It was happening. The factions had found them. Zaria's eyes met his, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. There was no time for fear. There was no time for hesitation. The door was their only way out. With a quick motion, Zaria placed her hand on the door, and it slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a large chamber beyond. It was dark, but the faint glow of energy markers illuminated the room. As they stepped inside, the sound of the explosions grew louder, closer. The factions were coming. "We don't have much time," Zaria said, urgency in her voice. "We need to reach the ship. It's our only chance." John nodded, adrenaline flooding his veins. His heart was pounding in his chest, but his mind was clear. He had no choice but to follow Zaria and escape. His bloodline, the power inside him, it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about survival. It was about saving not just himself, but the future of this world, and possibly his own. They sprinted through the chamber, passing rows of strange equipment and technology that John could barely comprehend. The air was thick with the scent of metal and dust. The path ahead was unclear, but Zaria knew exactly where to go. She had been here before. She had been preparing for this moment for a long time, even if she hadn't told John everything. As they reached the far side of the room, they saw it, a sleek, silver ship that shimmered in the dim light. It was like nothing John had ever seen before. Its design was organic, almost alive, with flowing curves that seemed to ripple with energy. The engines hummed quietly, ready for launch. "Get in," Zaria said, pushing open the hatch and stepping inside. "We don't have much time." John followed her into the ship, his breath coming in quick gasps. He had no idea what would happen next. But one thing was certain: this escape was just the beginning. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it with Zaria by his side. And together, they would have to face the unknown, a galaxy on the brink of war, and the ancient power that flowed through his veins. The final battle. The stars outside the ship's windows blurred as Zaria piloted them through the rapidly changing atmosphere, the silver vessel cutting through the clouds with a speed that John could barely comprehend. He sat in the co-pilot's seat, his hands gripping the armrests as if he could somehow steady the world around him. The ship shook occasionally as it broke through the turbulence, the darkened sky above streaked with flashes of distant battle. The factions that had come for him were in pursuit, and they were closing in fast. John's heart pounded in his chest. The air inside the ship was thick with the weight of their escape, the reality of what they had just left behind. He could still feel the tremors of the explosions echoing through his bones, the sudden violent force of the attack on the palace. It had been a matter of minutes between them realizing they were found and having to flee for their lives. He didn't know what would happen when they reached the outer rim, whether they'd be met by even greater danger or if they would finally have a chance to breathe. Zaria's eyes were focused, her hands moving deftly over the control panels. Her expression was calm, but John could see the tension in her shoulders. She wasn't just worried for their survival. She was worried about something much bigger. "They're getting closer," she said, her voice steady but strained. "The ship's speed can only outrun them for so long. We need to make it to the rendezvous point. If we don't, we'll be trapped out here." John swallowed hard, watching as the alien ships formed a tight formation behind them. They were relentless, unyielding. They had no intention of letting him go. It was no longer just about the power that lay hidden in his bloodline. It was about everything that could be destroyed if it fell into the wrong hands. The factions didn't know the full extent of what they were after, but they knew enough to realize they couldn't afford to let him live. "What happens when we reach the rendezvous point?" John asked, his voice filled with a mix of curiosity and dread. Zaria glanced at him briefly, her gaze fierce. "We meet with the resistance. They've been waiting for us, waiting for you, but it's not going to be easy. The factions will know we're headed there. They'll have reinforcements, and if we can't protect the location, the war will spill into the very heart of the galaxy." John felt his stomach twist. The pressure, the stakes, it was all coming to a head. He wasn't just a scientist anymore. He wasn't just a man caught up in an alien war. He was a weapon, a key to the destruction or salvation of two worlds. The ship lurched suddenly, jolting them both forward. The sudden shake nearly threw John out of his seat, but he caught himself against the control panel. Zaria's hands were fast, her movements instinctive as she stabilized the ship midair. "They hit us with an ion blast," she said. "They're trying to disable us." John's mind raced. "Can we fight back?" Zaria's lips tightened, and she flicked a switch on the console. "I have no choice. I've installed defense systems on this ship, but they're meant to buy us time, not to win a fight." Her fingers flew over the control panel, and the ship's weapon systems hummed to life. Twin laser cannons emerged from the ship's hull, locking onto the alien ships that had closed in on them. Zaria hesitated for a split second, then fired. The lasers shot out, slicing through the void of space with precision, but the enemy ships were fast, dodging, evading. Their sleek, triangular forms were designed for combat, not for escape. John gritted his teeth. His mind was flooded with thoughts of how powerless he felt. But then, a strange pull tugged at him, a familiar hum deep in his chest. It wasn't the ship's engines or the weapons firing. It was something else, something in his blood. "Zaria," he said suddenly, his voice sharp. "The power. It's—" "I know," she interrupted, her eyes flicking to him. "It's waking up inside you. I felt it too." John felt an energy surge through his body, as if the very air around him was alive, vibrating with purpose. The feeling wasn't one of fear anymore. It was something more. He could hear it in his mind, like a distant echo from an ancient place. The power that had been dormant in him, the gift from his bloodline, was awakening. Before he could stop himself, he reached out, his hand slamming against the ship's control panel. The moment his palm made contact, a pulse of energy shot through the ship's systems, vibrating along every circuit. The weapons systems flared brighter, the shields strengthened, and the ship itself hummed with a new kind of life. Zaria's eyes widened. "John, what did you do?" He looked at her, his expression a mix of disbelief and awe. "I didn't do anything. It was like the ship responded to me, to my blood. It's like I'm connected to it." She shook her head, her gaze hardening. "This is it. This is the power I've been talking about. You're not just a key anymore, John. You are the key to everything. If you can harness this." Another blast shook the ship, pulling their attention back to the threat at hand. Zaria snapped back into action, pushing the throttle forward. "I can't outrun them anymore. We're going to have to fight our way through." John closed his eyes for a moment, focusing on the feeling inside him. It was like an ancient current of energy flowing through his veins. He felt it, the power of his bloodline, the ability to shape the very energy around him. The force was vast, but raw, and he had no idea how to control it fully. But he knew one thing. If they were going to survive, he had to try. With a deep breath, John raised his hand again, focusing all of his willpower into the ship's weapons. The lasers charged once more, but this time, they didn't just shoot. They ripped through the space around them, a concentrated blast of power that shattered one of the enemy ships in an instant. The debris spun out of control, colliding with another ship, causing a chain reaction. The enemy fleet was thrown into chaos. Zaria's eyes were wide with disbelief. "John, you did it. You." But the danger wasn't over. More ships were approaching, their formations closing in. The Resistance rendezvous was still a long way off, and even though they had just scored a significant victory, the war was far from won. And John knew it wasn't just about fighting off enemy ships. It was about something much bigger. He was part of the Galaxy's future now. And whatever happened next, he would be ready. "Keep flying," John said, his voice calm now, despite the chaos around them. "We're not done yet." Zaria nodded, determination flashing in her eyes, as she turned the ship toward the stars, heading into the unknown, ready to face whatever came next. A new beginning. The stars stretched out before them, vast and endless, as the silver ship shot through the darkness of space. The hum of the engines had become a constant presence in the background, a reminder that they were still running, still escaping. But now, there was something different in the air. The intensity that had gripped John for so long had softened, replaced with an uneasy sense of resolve. He had never imagined that he would become a key figure in the fate of not just one, but two worlds. And yet, here he was, a human caught between the ancient power in his blood and the galaxy's desperate fight for survival. The silence inside the ship was deafening. Zaria sat at the helm, her hands resting lightly on the controls, her eyes scanning the black void ahead. Every so often, her gaze flickered to John, her face a mask of determination. But there was something else there, something that John could feel but couldn't fully understand. They had escaped the initial onslaught. The factions that had hunted them were now a distant threat, their pursuit temporarily thwarted by John's newly awakened abilities. The Resistance was waiting for them, a group that had been watching for his arrival, ready to take action. But none of it felt real. Not yet. Not until they were safe. Not until John knew what his place was in this fight. "How long until we reach the Resistance?" John asked, breaking the silence, His voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of exhaustion. He wasn't sure if it was physical or mental, but the weight of everything was starting to catch up with him. Zaria's eyes flicked to him, and she gave a small, knowing smile. A few hours. We're almost there. But even when we arrive, things won't be easy. There's a war on the horizon, John. A war that could destroy everything we fought for. John nodded, his eyes drifting out of the window. He could see the faint outline of the distant planet that housed the Resistance, its surface glowing faintly with energy. It was a sanctuary, at least for now. But he knew that sanctuary wouldn't last. The factions would never stop hunting him. And the power he now carried, this strange, ancient force inside him, was a beacon. It wasn't just his bloodline they wanted. It was the power that came with it. And that power was both a gift and a curse. I still don't understand how it all works, John said, almost to himself. How can my blood be tied to something like this? I'm not special. I'm just a man, a scientist. Zaria didn't respond right away. She simply continued to pilot the ship, but John could see the way her jaw tightened. She was trying to find the right words, trying to explain something that was impossible to explain. She had been through this herself, watching her world teeter on the brink of destruction, knowing that the answer to saving it lay with him. You don't have to understand it all, John, she said quietly. Not yet. The power inside you, it's been dormant for centuries. Your ancestors knew how to harness it, but it was lost over time. You're the one who has awakened it. And that's why you're here. John's mind was spinning. He wanted to understand, to make sense of everything. But the more he learned, the more confusing it became. What was this power? What could it do? And most importantly, could he control it? He had barely scratched the surface of what it was capable of. Zaria turned to him then, her expression softening. You're not just a man, John. You are the bridge between our people and yours. Your ancestors didn't just make a pact with us. They connected us. And now, the bond is reawakening. You carry the potential to unite our worlds, to heal the rift that has divided us for so long. If you can learn to control it. John's gaze met hers, and for the first time since arriving on this strange world, he felt something like hope flicker inside him. It was a small spark, barely visible against the overwhelming darkness, but it was there. He wasn't just a bystander anymore. He had a role to play. He had to believe that. We need to prepare, Zaria continued. The factions won't wait. They know you're here, and they'll stop at nothing to get to you. We'll have to fight for our survival, and for the future. John nodded, taking in her words. He wasn't sure how to fight, not with this power that still felt so foreign to him, but he had no choice. There was no turning back. He could feel the weight of it, the responsibility, the fear, the uncertainty, but he knew, deep down, that this was his path now. This was his purpose. The ship began to descend toward the planet's surface, the glow of its atmosphere now visible against the backdrop of space. The Resistance was waiting. Their future, and perhaps the future of the galaxy, hung in the balance. It was all on John now. The power inside him wasn't just a force of destruction. It was a force for change. But could he control it? Could he unite two worlds that had been at odds for centuries? Could he be the leader they needed? As the ship touched down, the ground shaking slightly beneath them, John stood up, his legs feeling heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. He glanced at Zaria, who was already standing, her face set with determination. She was ready. But was he? Are you ready, John? Zaria asked, her voice steady, but filled with a quiet underlying urgency. John took a deep breath, feeling the pulse of energy within him. He didn't have all the answers. He didn't know what would happen next. But he knew this. The war was coming. And no matter what the future held, he was ready to face it. He had to be. For Earth. For this world. For the people who had placed their trust in him. I'm ready, he said, his voice filled with a newfound strength. Let's end this." And with that, they stepped out of the ship onto the soil of the Resistance's stronghold. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: this was just the beginning. The battle was far from over, and John knew that what he did next would determine the fate of both their worlds. As they walked toward the gathering Resistance forces, John couldn't shake the feeling that the galaxy itself was holding its breath. The final battle had yet to come, but its outcome would be determined by the choices they made now. And John was ready to make those choices. He had no idea where this journey would take him, but he knew one thing: he would face it head-on, whatever it took, because in the end, it was no longer just about surviving. It was about saving everything he had come to care for. The war was coming, and it was his fight to win.